So today we are going to be talking with Anita, Malika Dehingia, and Arnab Day from the Center on Gender Equity and Health at UC San Diego about their series of briefs on big data and gender in the age of COVID-19. The series explores how big data, such as Twitter data and Google Trends, can help fill gaps in traditional data collection and provide unique insights into a range of issues affecting women and girls. So thank you, Anita, Malika, and Arnab for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah. Awesome. So before diving into the more granular level details of your briefs, let's talk about the overarching goal and benefits of leveraging big data for gender equality in the age of COVID-19. So we know that understanding the gendered effects of the COVID-19 pandemic is challenging because of the limitations in data collection. So how is big data helping to fill these information gaps when traditional data is lacking or unavailable?
I can start with that. And I apologize, my computer microphone is broken. And so now what you will see is a beautiful black screen to display my name and my iPhone. We're a group that focuses through a project called Emerge, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We are a group that focuses on gender data and measurement. So we are really interested in the capture of data that will illuminate gender equality and empowerment. We have really emphasized focus on survey data collection because for a lot of the social and behavioral measures that we're interested in, we rely on survey data. At this time, it's not easy or necessarily safe for people to be able to collect data in the field, to collect survey data in the field. So what a lot of people are doing is they're doing data collection via phone, that's going to be a biased sample. And even data collection from the phone can be very time consuming. A lot of people aren't in the offices, training opportunities aren't available. So it really is leaving us with a gap in knowledge that we need to fill because things are changing rapidly under the pandemic, under shutdowns, not just the health impact of the pandemic, but also just the social impact, the well-being impact, broadly speaking. We won't be able to understand that unless we have some aspect of measurement that we can capture. So we, as a group, decided that one thing that we could do is look to big data that is rapidly produced and timely to provide insight into the gendered effects of the COVID pandemic. And so that's really what was the beginning of this project. And then we work closely with Data2X, which is a UN Foundation-based organization or connected organization, to be able to ensure that when we do these big data analyses, not only are we trying to showcase findings, but we actually include the methodology. We would like to include the methodology so that other people can be able to replicate it in their country context or in their regional context. So that was sort of the basis and what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Yeah, I love how your briefs are written and how it does highlight the methodology, especially being a Master's of Business Analytics student myself. It's really interesting to read about the methodology, and I can see how what I'm learning in school is applied in what you guys are doing, which is always great to see. And based on what you said, is it safe to say that COVID-19 and the global economic recession that we're in right now is stimulating innovation in gender research?
Oh, wow, that's a bold statement. I think we have been focusing on how it's been stimulating gender regressive practices as of late. But yeah, I think it has been. I think that we've had to be very innovative in terms of distant partnerships, in terms of data collection, analysis, and interpretation of that data, in terms of how we're collaborating. So yeah, I think yes, I would say that. Malika and Arnab, I want to kind of defer to them because they've been doing much more of the analytic approaches and generation of the findings.
Yeah, so I think I'm talking a bit about what other organizations are doing and adopting a broader definition of big data here. In the pandemic, we're definitely seeing an increase in public-private partnership efforts in collecting more gender-related big data through these private organizations, which already have an existing infrastructure, existing large social networks to be able to reach out to large number of people very rapidly, very quickly. For example, Facebook has collaborated with the World Bank, and they're taking advantage of this large user base that Facebook already has to carry out surveys to understand gender equality at home. Facebook is also carrying out another survey to understand how male versus female business owners have been impacted by the pandemic. So I think there definitely has been a lot of innovation during the pandemic. We're also seeing a lot of use of non-traditional forms of data, like data from hotline centers for domestic violence to understand how the pandemic has increased domestic violence rates across different geographies. Yeah. Arnab, do you have anything to add?
Not at the moment. I think I would just like to add one small point which we can discuss later. So Anita spoke about how innovations have been aimed at closing the gap in knowledge that we have because we cannot go out and do surveys. But I think a lot of this research is also addressing the gap in emerging issues. So some of the research that we have been doing do bring up some really urgent and important issues that might not be as obvious. Some of our recent Twitter analysis highlighted the issue of how girls and women in crisis-affected areas were doubly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and how their education and health outcomes were severely exacerbated because of COVID. So yeah, so I think research like this, while it's innovative, it's also kind of bringing up really urgent and emerging topics that can be further explored and dived into.
It's always nice to identify those silver linings during the pandemic and hear that we are finding new ways to identify and illuminate those problems that are continuing to rise during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So now getting into your briefs, your first brief studied Twitter conversations of Indian feminist activists to help identify gender issues that need attention but are under-prioritized politically. So could you give us a bit of background and walk us through your approach, the results, and the implications of your analysis?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So this brief examines tweets that were posted by feminist activists from India during the pandemic. And our main goal here was to check if there were key topics of discussions that were being talked about or posted by these activists, and if there were any identifiable patterns to these discussions and posts. And the main idea behind doing this, as you pointed out, was primarily to highlight different issues related to gender that feminist activists in India were talking about. Issues that might not necessarily be an agenda of the government or agenda of funding organizations. And the key reason we felt such an analysis would be of value was in the context of the nature of urgency for understanding gender issues during the pandemic. Like I mentioned, right after a month of countries going into lockdown, we were seeing reports about increase in cases of domestic violence against women across different countries. And just overall, we were observing very rapid impacts and setbacks to gender equality, to the progress of gender equality. So with this analysis, we wanted to tap into the potential of Twitter, which is now very commonly used as a tool for activism, and also because Twitter data is publicly available for free. So we wanted to provide a snapshot of what, according to grassroots feminist activists, were the critical issues of gender during the pandemic. So that's the brief background and rationale behind why we worked on this brief. And the first step in running the analysis was, of course, to identify the feminist activist Twitter accounts. So we reached out to multiple gender researchers from India to get a list of feminist activist accounts that they follow. And then we also looked for any feminist accounts that were followed by these activists themselves to get a more comprehensive list of Twitter accounts. After this process, our final sample was a list of 59 Twitter accounts. We then extracted all of the recent tweets posted by these accounts using the official Twitter API. Then moving on to the analysis, so we used a very commonly used text analysis method, which is called topic modeling. So topic modeling automatically identifies and organizes text that is similar in terms of semantics. I'll try to keep this simple here and not get into the statistics, but to give a very basic example, let's say we have a number of different tweets. First of which is, I love to play soccer. And the second tweet is, Liverpool is my favorite soccer team. And the third is, I'm planning to get a pet dog. And the fourth one is, I've never had a pet dog growing up. So what topic modeling would do is it will tell you that the first two topics, that you have two topics in the set of 4 tweets. And the topic 1 is represented by the word soccer, which was a common word in the first 2 tweets. And the second topic is represented by the words pet and a dog, which were the common words for the remaining 2 tweets. Of course, this is a very simplistic example. Often in most research, as well as in our own analysis, topic modeling is dealing with a much larger and much complex set of text. But the basic idea remains the same. It's to look at the different words that are occurring in each text and also the patterns of words across the sample of text. So you can look at the words corresponding to each topic and infer what each topic represents. You can also go back to each tweet and look at what topic has been assigned to the tweets to infer what the topics are truly capturing. Sorry, Anita, were you saying something?
No.
Okay. So when we ran topic modeling on our sample, we identified 18 different topics. We identified topics related to COVID, of course. There was a topic on COVID-related health services and COVID vaccine. We also found multiple topics on gender issues such as violence against women. So many activists were using Twitter to create awareness about increasing rates of domestic violence during the pandemic. There were also topics on data feminism and importance of sex education. We also found topics related to political activism and civil unrest in the country and about the needs of socially marginalized groups, which I think alludes to the fact that political activism and fighting for civil rights is as much a part of or is concurrent with feminist activism. And then we also ran some additional analysis after identifying these topics. We looked at temporal trends of these topics. So when did certain topics peak, or when were certain topics being posted about the most? And what we found was that majority of the topics peaked in response to real world events. For example, there was an incident in India that received a lot of media attention, where a few boys were posting morphed images of their female classmates on Instagram chat. And what we see from our analysis is that right after that incident was covered by the media, there was a peak in the topic related to education, where majority of the tweets from feminist activists were about importance of sex education and about the importance of teaching consent to young boys. So I think these results show that Twitter is being used in India as a platform for very real-time activism. Popular topics of discussion in Twitter coincide with key offline events of importance. And then, yeah, another finding that we found was that most of the observed peaks in topics were attached to the use of specific hashtags, which highlights the potential of effective social media campaigns in spreading awareness around issues of importance. So yeah, these are some of the key findings briefly. And if anyone here is interested in running this analysis for a different country context, or even using the text analysis method for a different research question that you might have, we have made the code available in public domain. So please feel free to use it.
Thank you so much, Mallika. I think that we're coming to understand that social media platforms have really become the world's largest database of emotions, attitudes, and cultural norms. And it's amazing that you were able to draw from that wealth of information in such a meaningful way. So your second brief, which I believe Arnab is going to talk about, equally as amazing, uses Google Trends data to assess reproductive health needs in Nigeria during the pandemic. So again, could you give us a bit of background, walk us through your approach and highlight some of the key findings?
Sure. I think at the time when we were working on the Twitter analysis, we were also reviewing papers which talked about how pregnancies and abortions were being affected by during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we were looking at data across the world. We looked at India, we looked at some of the African countries, and we identified that in most of the countries, there were peaks around search terms related to pregnancy, abortion, which corresponded very highly with the lockdown periods that these countries had. And this was really surprising to us. And we kind of looked a bit deeper into their context, which led us to find that, a lot of these countries had very restrictive norms around abortions. So we picked Nigeria as a specific case in point, and we started looking at the data a little bit deeper. We chose Google Trends to look at how searches around these specific terms kind of increased or decreased during the pandemic. And there are really two ways to go about it from a very data analysis angle. So there's something called Google Trends, which is a very simple way of analyzing relative interest in search terms. But then there's another thing which is called Google Health data. Now the difference between these two data sets is that the usual Google Trends data allows us only relative interest in a specific search term. So for example, if you search, let's say, football and cricket, just to extend Mallika's example, these two, so Google Trends would return results where the search terms would be reported out of 100, and let's say cricket is less famous than football. So cricket would, the search trends around cricket would be kind of be reported in relative terms to football. In our context, what we found was if we search for terms related to pregnancy and abortion and pregnancy test, if we pool all of these terms together on Google Trends, what it does is it kind of reports relative frequencies of these search terms. So that's Google Trends. On the other hand, if you really want to look at absolute numbers of searches that were made, you would need to go to something called Google Health data, and that needs like permissions from Google and writing to them and then allowing you to like access their data on specific search terms. We stuck for this example to Google search trends, and to avoid the problem of having relative reports, we searched individual search terms in a specific query. So what we did was in one search, we only used the first term of pregnancy. In the second search, we used the second term of pregnancy test, and so on and so forth. So we kept these really segregated. We did not merge multiple terms together. And the data, the raw data that you kind of get is a week by week interest in search over time for a particular search term. So our first search term was pregnancy, and we specified the period to start from 1st of March 2020 to, I believe, 31st January 2021. And the search results that we got was a week by week interest over time on those specific terms. So this allowed us to plot interest in these terms over time, which gave us a really good curve. We smoothened that curve using lowest smoothing, and that kind of reduced some of the noise that was there in the data. And once we had this trend, we superimposed this with the lockdown phases that Nigeria saw. So Nigeria had like 4 different phases of lockdown, of which the first phase of lockdown was the most strictest, and that was also the time that that was really the beginning and the onset of the whole pandemic. And what we saw was really interesting. We find that search terms around pregnancy test, abortion, and misoprostol, which is a drug used to induce abortion, all of these search terms really peaked during the first phase of lockdown, which kind of brings us to some real world implications. First, we kind of conclude that this is not causal. So we cannot say that, okay, COVID-19 absolutely caused an immense surge in pregnancies or immense surge in abortions. However, this interest in search term, which is so different and so and a spike that is so obvious, kind of implicates that there was a surge in the interest around these terms, which means that there might have been a corresponding surge in the healthcare needs in the country. And that started to kind of delve into us that, if there was such a sharp spike in interests around pregnancies and abortions, was the healthcare system thinking about these surges or these increased needs? And to the best of our belief, it was not. I mean, no country was thinking to ramp up its sexual and reproductive health services in the middle of the pandemic. And that is really crucial here, because analyses like these really help us in understanding some of the unintended effects of pandemics or lockdowns, and how health systems can be better prepared to serve those needs in any future context. So yeah, that's a brief summary of how we approached the research question and the implications that our findings made. And just like the first brief, I think this brief also includes all the codes and all the raw data sets as well. So if somebody wants to do the same analysis in a different country context or use different search terms, just feel free to use the code.
Thank you, Arnab. Really incredible work. And again, so impressive that you and other big data researchers are able to pull from this existing public information to fill these gaps and highlight these key gendered issues. So in the last question from me today, before we move on to the audience questions, is in recent years, we've seen how the amounts of data can illuminate gendered topics of global concern, and your research is a great example of this. With this in mind, where do you see emerging opportunities in the realm of big data in terms of progress for women and girls?
I can go first. I think I see huge potential in Twitter. So Twitter is this huge, massive source of data where, as you rightly said, I think which reflects our emotions, our sentiments, our anger, frustration, joy. So it's a huge and live data set that kind of can be tapped into from multiple facets. So 2 things come to my mind. The first one is that it's all about innovative sampling. So Twitter, so there are 2 components to analyzing Twitter, like 2 big components. One is, how do you approach your sample? How do you choose or drill down to your specific population of interest? So are you interested in just women? Are you interested in married women? Are you interested in young girls, or are you interested in families? So are you interested in male teachers, female teachers? So there are multiple ways in which you can think of, there are multiple populations that can be of interest to you as a researcher, and there are multiple ways that you can sample Twitter handles and see what their emotions are, what their sentiments are, what they are talking about. Another big thing that I feel about that this research can go into is to tap into the social network side of Twitter. So far we have been looking at how we can analyze Twitter data to understand sentiments, to understand different topics that are being discussed. But another hugely unexplored area when it comes to Twitter data, I think, is analysis of social networks that get formed. How do I mean, there are leaders in every sector. There are for example, in Mallika's first brief, we looked at feminist activists. So how does a tweet made from a leader or from a thought leader influence the thinking of their followers, so to say? And this has more real life consequences that we would believe. I mean, things that we see on Twitter, read on Twitter, see on YouTube, actually influence our life in quite a substantial way than we choose to admit. I feel. So I think that's the direction that big data analysis should be heading towards. So thinking more innovatively about how do we sample our specific research groups of interest, and also to think of more innovative ways to harness the potential of the social network that exists on Twitter, in addition to doing more interesting work around topic modeling and sentiment analysis.
Thank you, Arnab. Anita or Mallika, do you guys have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So I absolutely agree with what Arnab just mentioned. Definitely, I see tremendous potential in leveraging these publicly available big data sources, and be that social media data or data from Google or data from digital health records. There's already been some very interesting work done with big data sources to understand different social issues, which now I think could be extended to gender-related questions. For example, satellite data on climate and health, climate and weather has been used to examine the impacts of climate change on a bunch of humanitarian issues. And it can also be used to study how climate shocks can impact women and girls' lives. Similarly, there's also work done with satellite data, again, on night lights to predict the status of economic development for different countries. And this work has actually received a lot of attention from the research and policy community, because frequent and granular data on development is missing for a lot of African countries. So if I'm thinking of it from a gender perspective, there's potential to combine data on night lights or data from Google Street View, which tells you how safe and accessible different cities and towns are, and combining that with different traditional sources of data to predict indicators of gender development. But related to the point of innovating in terms of sampling that Arnab just mentioned, I think while there is work being done on using big data sources to answer questions related to gender, there is also a parallel sort of research community that is working on understanding how feasible and accurate it is when we're using big data sources. For example, there's work being done to understand what kind of demographic are most represented when we are using Twitter data, or even how ethical it is to use social media data in the first place, and how we can mitigate some of these different secondary biases. So such work, I think, is equally important and definitely needs more focus in the coming future, so that we're truly able to use big data in a meaningful and responsible way.
Thank you, Mallika. Anita, anything else to add?
Honestly, no. They actually do the detailed analysis and know the data better than I do. I'm just the person who signs off. So I'm going to defer questions to them, unless they're pretty much how we operate as a as a group. They're far stronger than I am, and I learn a lot from both of them.
Well, they're doing a great job. All right, so I would now like to open the floor to questions from the audience. If you have a question, feel free to either use the raise hand function and I will filter questions from there, or feel free to throw your question in the chat. Yes, Gabriel.
So I thought both examples were very interesting, but going back to the example on Google Trends data on reproductive health, it sounds like the insights that were provided were more retrospective. So, you can see all of how trends may have spiked during coronavirus lockdown, and therefore the government should have prepared this way. But I'm curious, how do governments leverage similar sorts of insights or similar sorts of analysis going forward? So, and assuming that lockdowns are infrequent or hopefully rare, moving forward, what might those leading indicators look like?
Yeah, so I think that's a really really important point and question. I think we also felt that the utility of this particular analysis is limited because it only throws light on what has happened in the past and what the government should have done or might have done. However, I think the advantage of Google Trends that we can really leverage is to do this to do the same thing more frequently. So look out for spikes that are happening now, or look out for trends that are seeing a sudden jump within a period of a few weeks that is at present. Businesses do that all the time. I think one of the learnings that I had from this analysis was I think businesses use this far more frequently than they do to keep themselves updated on what customers think, what customers want, what is trending, what is not trending, and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, while we can't predict the future, especially when the future events are as dramatic as the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, we can run forecasting models, but most of the forecasting that I was trying to do based on COVID data would just be garbage because the spikes are so high and so unpredictable. So yeah, that's one kind of thing. So we can, as you rightly said, I mean, let's hope this never happens again. And if it doesn't, we can think of ways to forecast Google Trends data to draw some meaningful guidance into what might happen. But another relevant thing that can be replicated in a lot of contexts is to do the same thing more frequently, to do this more, to kind of sample this data more frequently on a weekly or a quarterly basis and try to take steps to mitigate some of these challenges.
Thank you. Yeah, it's also interesting to think about how governments or healthcare providers might actually be able to use those insights that might seem retrospective, but sort of pull out the second and third order effects of what those might mean.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Thank you for that question, Gabe, and the thoughtful response, Arnab. We have another interesting question in the chat. One area of concern that comes to mind when talking about big data and privacy one area of concern that comes to mind when we talk about big data is privacy. So Jade asks, how can researchers like yourself convince data holders, whether it be large companies or individual users, to be more open to collaboration that allow access while ensuring security?
I can go first. So, like I said, there is a lot of research that's going on to understand, the ethical concerns related to using of big data. And there are many frameworks that have been developed on how you can share data in order to facilitate replication and reproduction of your research, while also maintaining the ethical standards. For example, with Twitter data, we refrain from providing the tweets verbatim because then people can, identify who posted it, and there might be a potential for harm for the Twitter owners or tweet owners. But then at the same time, there's also a concept of hydration of tweets, where you can, hydrate the tweets. Basically, you can provide people with Twitter IDs, which then other researchers can use in case they want to use the exact same tweets for certain analysis. But having said that, I also think that the pandemic in general has led to an increase in willingness of different stakeholders to share data and sort of make science more open because of the fact that there is an urgency to understand, the different impacts of the pandemic. One example that comes to my mind is there's this group in New York University. I think they have created a very large repository of global data sets related to COVID-19. Some of them are also related to gender. And they basically facilitate collaborations between different organizations to share data and to share their research and make science more open.
Thank you, Mallika.
Yeah, just to extend that thought, I think Mallika touched upon the idea of reproducibility. Personally, when using data sources such as Twitter and gender, I find that we always have to, there's a very tight balance between privacy and research ethics and making your data more reproducible. So for example, when we do Twitter data, Mallika, just as Mallika said, we refrain from sharing the Twitter accounts that we used to analyze our data or the tweets that we extracted. While this is ensuring privacy of researchers and the Twitter account holders, it also makes your research a little bit not reproducible, right? I mean, if you do not have the exact Twitter accounts, you cannot really reproduce the results. Same thing kind of sticks with Google Trends as well, because Google Trends, so the data that you download today, they refresh their data sets and they kind of sample the data in a way that changes every 48 hours or so. So the data that I downloaded today using a specific search term would change a little bit every 48 hours. So that makes reproducibility a different ball game altogether when it comes to big data analysis, and throws a couple of curveballs to ensure open science and reproducibility in research. But I think privacy here is something that would always trump reproducibility, and ensuring that we have all the protocols and all the codes in place that ensures that privacy of the users is absolutely important when it comes to big data analysis.
Thank you, Arnab. We have one question in the chat and one hand raised. So I'll start with the hand raised before going to the chat. Stephanie?
Hi, yes. I hope that you're all able to hear me. I'm actually in a car right now, so this isn't really the best situation, but I'm just so excited by this conversation. Just to introduce myself just quickly, my name is Stephanie, and I've worked on gender-based violence and data and technology for a while. I've actually conducted a quite similar scraping of Twitter in order to analyze, people who have been in the public space. And I'm curious from you guys if you have seen, any interest in using your results. And then forgive me if I cut out and missed part of it, but as far as, creating a machine learning algorithm, have you guys done that or thought of that as far as with your results so that you can potentially use that data to build on itself in the future?
So for the first brief, which was with Twitter data, we did use machine learning algorithms. The topic modeling method that I was talking about, it is it's an unsupervised form of machine learning, which basically means that there's no training data, or it's an automatic form of predicting things. So yeah, we have used it, and in terms of like its use in the future by others or by even us, this machine learning, this method is basically a method of analyzing text data. So if we have a different research question related to tweets from Twitter, we can definitely use the same method. In fact, actually, the fourth brief that is coming out in this series that again uses topic modeling, which is actually using a similar code that we've already used. So yeah. Yeah, I don't know, Arnab, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, not at the moment.
Thank you for that question, Stephanie, and thanks for the thoughtful response, Mallika. Just for the sake of time, I don't think we can get to the last question, but would it be okay if the audience member with the question in the chat could maybe reach out to one of you on LinkedIn if they have further questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are also here to learn, so
yeah,
questions are most welcome at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much. So Simran, if you still have your question, feel free to reach out to Mallika or Arnab on LinkedIn. So one question that I just want to ask you guys before wrapping up, a quick one, is I understand briefs will be published once a month. So can you give us any hints as to what to expect in the coming months?
Oh yeah, we're really excited about the next one, actually. So the third brief gets published hopefully next week, the coming week, and that is on online misogyny before and during COVID. So we are looking at whether or not the prevalence of online misogynistic posts on Twitter increased post the pandemic across 5 South Asian countries. So yeah, do look out for that, and I hope you guys enjoy reading it. And then there's another one which is led by Arnab, if you want to talk about it, Arnab.
Yeah, I think the fifth brief we are working on looks at the gendered effect of the pandemic on education. So for that, we again harness Twitter data to look at what educational institutions who tweet about international education, what they are talking about, and what are the issues that they have raised starting from the pandemic. And yeah, early results do show us that there have been severe impacts on women and girls' education during the pandemic that a lot of these institutions and organizations have raised. And it brings kind of attention to some of these topics. One of them that I was talking about is the impacts on education on crisis-affected girls and women, and how these effects were exacerbated by the pandemic. We also look at the effects on effects on education that was caused due to increased food insecurity during the pandemic in a lot of low resource settings. So yeah, these are some of the early findings from brief 5 that should be out, I think, end of April, I believe. Yeah.
Yep.
Amazing. I look forward to reading those.
Sure.
So again, thank you to all 3 of you for joining us today. Thank you to our audience. Just to wrap up here, let me share my screen quickly. So if you enjoyed the lounge today, stay tuned for our upcoming events on our LinkedIn pages and other social media pages. Notably, we just selected a book for our April book club. It is called The 3 Mothers, and it's a book that celebrates Black motherhood by telling the story of 3 women who raised and shaped some of America's most pivotal heroes: Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin. So it's going to be a great read and a great conversation. So yeah, thank you, Mallika. Thank you, Arnab. Thank you, Anita. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.